Well, welcome everyone to the Masculine Wilderness podcast. I am your host, Tom Perez. I'm the founder and CEO of Epic Project. This podcast has been a labor of love and an ongoing conversation with people that our work at Epic has intersected with in various ways over the years, and really excited about for all of you to get to know my friend Andrew Carruthers here. But we've been on a little bit of a hiatus. We have had a lot of travel and speaking commitments these last several weeks, so we're kind of getting back into the rhythm for the summer. So welcome back, everyone. Andrew, I want you to just take a few minutes and just maybe share some things about who you are and your work. And then, as we were talking before we kind of came on live, I'm grateful for the chance to have this conversation today. Two men who are friends, who respect each other. And we just want to talk about kind of where things are at in our respective worlds these days. But before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. And I'm just so happy that you said you respect me. Like, that just makes me feel so happy.
I'm sorry that it surprised you, but I do.
No, I'm just kidding. We've always had such an awesome connection. And so I'm super happy to have this conversation with you. So my name is Andrew Carruthers. Hi. My company that I currently have is called Out of Step, and it's what I do is I call it wayfinding. And I switched a lot about my branding just recently because for a long time I called myself a coach, because that was just kind of the terminology that most people that do my type of work tend to use. So it was something that was kind of familiar to people. But to be honest, ever since I got my life coaching certification way back in, that was 2009.
A lifetime ago.
Feels like it.
Yeah.
That terminology of like life coach never actually felt great to me. But it was just one of those things, like when people say, well, what do? You tend to need to have something that you can say quickly. Yeah. Well, I'm ... What I noticed over time was, even when I just would tell people, well, I'm a coach, they'd be like, well, what do you mean by that? So I was like, well, why do I even have to use the word coach then? So that's where I was like, okay, what do I feel like I really do? And I feel like what I really do for the people that I work with is I support them in finding their way. So that term Wayfinder came up, and I was like, I feel like that's what I do. I just support people to find their way. So that was the switch for me, to a different type of terminology. And it just feels so much more authentic to me to say that to someone.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of a navigational assist that you bring to people. What led you to that? And I mean, since you kind of started this back in 2009, but like prior to that, what were you involved in then?
I'll try to keep this a somewhat short story because it can turn into like an hour-long podcast. I apprenticed at a salon in Salt Lake City, and that started back in the summer of 1999. Or wait, was it 98? I can't remember sometimes. I don't remember if it was 98 or 99. That doesn't matter. But pretty quickly within my apprenticeship, I had the opportunity to go out and start teaching classes for this product company called TG. And these were just like product knowledge classes where I'd go to salons and just teach them like, hey, this is so-and-so shampoo and it has these ingredients and you should use it on your clients like this. And that was actually even before I was doing hair. I was still just apprenticing. But really everything kind of started with those classes because I had never thought of myself as a teacher. But being able to help shape people through like teaching them just about shampoo was like, oh my gosh, this is really incredible. And it really spoke to me. So that really started me off in the hair world and more as like a mentor and an educator and really quite quickly. And right about, I'm going to skip ahead a bit, right around like 2006, 2007, I took a position with the company that I had been working as an educator for called Paul Mitchell Advanced Education. And I took the position as the education director for the advanced education department. So we were the department that went out and trained all the teachers at the schools, like, here's how to teach, which initially I loved. It was such an awesome job, but I was trying to perform this very full-time job with Paul Mitchell also still trying to maintain a full-time clientele at the salon, also doing a lot for the salons that I worked for, also potentially about to purchase into it as a partner in one of the locations. And I just hit this like super burnout space where I thought I was going to throw in the towel completely on the hair industry at that point. And the life coach I was working with, Lynn Christian, they helped walk me through a process of really looking at what are my strengths? What are my values? What are the things I'm passionate about? What are other avenues that I could maybe take those strengths and those passions? And becoming a coach just seemed like, wow, that's just the logical next step. So that's where I started to train as a coach and kind of carried on the hairdressing career parallel with it for a long time.
And that Wayfinder theme is just really, I can see it as a through line in all of this, really.
Yeah.
The connection.
Yeah, exactly. Just because that's how I pictured myself as an educator too. I mean, I won't lie. Of course, there was kind of the, especially when I was younger, this sort of ego side of it that I got to be up on these stages and have lots of people look at me and think I was cool. But
I've had those moments too. Yeah.
Yeah. But there was definitely that part of me that got fueled by the fact that I got to help people, support people, help grow people.
In those moments, did you have, like, thinking back on it now, did you have a sense of like, and I'm really doing what I'm wired to do?
I would
Are
love
you
to
aware
say,
of it?
I don't know that I was aware of it. I think that looking back and recognizing how much of a passion I had for it, like the teaching piece was always the piece that never felt hard. Like the teaching piece always felt good. It always felt like it refueled me. There was definitely a point that the hairdressing part, the actual doing of hair, the artistry of hair, that turned into something I did. It wasn't necessarily passion for it anymore. So even before I really was clear that this aspect of supporting people, like you said, is almost like a core essence of mine, I can look back and definitely see that it was showing up that way in my life.
Right. And somewhere in this story, your paths crossed with a woman who was one of our earlier guests on this podcast, one of my coolest friends in the world, Michelle Boucher. Where did she come into this story? Because she actually celebrated 25 years, right?
Yeah, 25 years together. Yeah, we officially started dating in 2000. And since we don't have like an official wedding necessarily, we received a blessing by a Buddhist monk in 2006 or 2007, and that's what we kind of call our wedding. But we really look at when we started to date and like be together as like the start of our relationship. So it's been 25 years. She actually started to come to the salon. Okay, so it was the summer of 99 that I started with the salon because she started to come to get her hair done by the guy that I was apprenticing under. And during that time, my job was basically to like shampoo and blow dry everyone that he worked on. He pretty much just did the haircuts, just applied color. I did everything else. So this stunningly beautiful girl walks through the door and I'm like, please let that be Tyson's next client. And it was Michelle. She swears that I did not say a word to her the entire time. I don't think that's true. I don't think I said a lot, but I think I probably said at least a few things.
I want to know while you were washing her hair, were your hands shaking?
Well, so the shampoo process at our salon was like the luxury service. It was like a 10-minute shampoo and head massage. So I was quite the expert at that. So that part I felt really confident.
You got that nailed.
There was probably some shaking happening while I was blow drying her hair because Michelle has like super thick, coarse, curly hair that's really hard to smooth out. So I was probably breaking a sweat and shaking a bit during that process.
That's so great. Well, I mean, you guys are such a fascinating and deep couple. We've had conversations over the years, and just your perspective on almost anything that I could think of to ask either of you. It's just always so fun to have that conversation. I want to talk about what you have seen, maybe more now that you've been doing the wayfinding work with clients. Tell me a little bit more about like who your clientele are, like who are the people that you work with? Because my understanding is it's a pretty broad demographic, but tell me a little bit about the kinds of people that you end up working with, and what is that process? Just like generally speaking, what does that look like?
Yeah, and that's also been part of the challenge, is that I do have a pretty broad spectrum of people that I work with. I've started to find that naturally it has defined itself, which most of the people that I work with at this point are leaders of some sort, meaning they might have a company, they might be in leadership positions elsewhere within their life, maybe within groups that they're part of. Very often they might be educators or other coaches, but people that are serving and supporting other humans.
Yeah.
That's who tends to be my clientele at this point. And the work itself can look really drastically different depending on the specific need of why they're hiring me.
Yeah.
Because also part of the reason I switched to this terminology, wayfinding, is because if you go to the International Coaching Federation, they have a pretty defined perspective of what coaching is and what coaching is not. Since I was brought up with that perception of like, well, this is my job as a coach, which like a ICF defined coach is supposed to basically have no influence with the client. Like they're just there to draw out and support the other person without any influence whatsoever. But what I found is people were hiring me because they wanted mentorship. They wanted the experience that I had, because a lot of them were going through some of the similar processes. They saw me transition from, being a hairdresser and an education director for a company or a salon owner to now being more of that coach and support to other humans. So I had a lot of people coming to me that were like, well, I want to know about your experience. I want that influence.
Yeah. Yeah. And that does sound significantly different than my understanding of what like coaching is. How do people respond to that?
So, so far, really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it's so different for each person. Like I have some clients that, we're doing a lot more somatic, like deep somatic work together. Like we are really going into belief systems trapped in the body. And it's more about, really connecting into emotional and physical sensation within the body to open it up and to, actually move through these things that might be trapped or blocked for them. And I do have clients too that it's a bit more cerebral. They're looking at things more from a practical mindset and just need support on their path. Like I have a person, they're a salon owner, and most of why they've hired me is to just really support them to be the best leader that they can possibly be. So a lot of our conversations are around, how to show up as the leader that they want to be, how to communicate with their team in the way that they want to communicate, how to build their relationships with the people within their company. So it can really vary. Or I also have people who are developing as educators and speakers and facilitators. So some of our sessions might have much more focus on developing the skill sets of actually being in front of people and facilitating conversations within a space or facilitating an educational process. So yeah, it can be like a really wide range of different experiences. And that's why it's almost hard to tell people what I do, because I tailor it so specifically to each person's needs.
Yeah. When you use the term wayfinder, I immediately thought of the Pacific Islander cultures where wayfinding was a navigational, a very intuitive, generationally taught like navigation system.
Right.
And I've read a ton about that and how they were able to literally find their way across enormously vast stretches of ocean and end up exactly where they thought they would go. It's a very vivid label, and I could see how it gives you much more freedom and latitude with the people that you work with. I'm curious to know, we've talked a little bit about this. I know Michelle and I have talked as well, a whole bunch of other people on this podcast, but I'm curious to know from you, how has your sense of yourself as a man, I use the term masculine mythology. We're all kind of, it's one way or another, it's kind of passed on to us. And myth doesn't mean necessarily something that's not true, but it can have all kinds of exaggerations and whatnot. But my sense of myself as a man was shaped in very distinct environments, as it was for you. I suspect those were a little bit different, but like what were some of the things that kind of formed and shaped you as a man and kind of brought you into this particular work at this season of your life?
There was quite a few things that really dramatically shaped, especially my perception of what that means to be a, quote, man, right?
Yeah.
Because my relationship with my own father had a lot of ups and downs with it, because when I was young, it was very much a quite picturesque model of like, fatherhood son kind of relationship. We were out camping, we were going fishing. He was in bluegrass bands and we would be at bluegrass festivals and,
in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this was back in PA.
Yeah. Tell me more about that, just that relationship.
So really the early portions of that relationship were excellent. He taught me how to play music. He taught me how to use a camera. A lot of things that, as you can, see it, I've got guitars hanging around me, like things that have really, really stuck with me. And it was kind of like early teens. I want to say probably like 12, 13 years old. My parents started to not have a good relationship. And that really started to affect both of them. But it really affected my dad's ability to continue to be a good father. He started to really suffer from depression. He was pretty much stoned 24 hours a day just to kind of like stay copacetic. And especially after they split, he pretty much just started to leave me alone, which in some ways, being like a young teenager, I didn't hate at that point, because my best friend Josh and I we'd stay up till like 2:00 in the morning playing punk rock music in the basement. And since he was probably staying over at his friend Charlie's house getting stoned, like there was no one to bother us. Like we'd stay up all night watching Headbangers Ball and then play music in the basement. So there was things during that time where I was like, well, shit, this is all right. But now looking back, I can also see how much that has shaped kind of like my picture of masculinity and what that means.
Did it go from there for you?
So after he started, I always had a really, really good relationship with my mom, but especially after he started to fall off as kind of a father figure, it really turned so much of my attention to my mom. In the last few years that I lived in Salt Lake City, or I'm sorry, not Salt Lake, York, Pennsylvania, I lived with my mom. And I think because I had such a close relationship with her, and I really had a close relationship with a lot of the women within my life, I feel like that more feminine aspect of me maybe became a little more in the forefront. Like I feel like some of those, what we traditionally call like masculine aspects, they started to kind of take a bit of a back seat. And it wasn't until just actually the last few years that I've really gotten into men's work that I started to see how much that really did affect certain aspects of how I, just maneuver through life and how I communicate and connect, especially with other men.
That's my next question. So like in the wayfinding work, what are the men like that are coming to you? Are there any themes in the struggles or the questions they're asking? Are you picking up on anything, especially with respect to the men that you're working with?
Yeah, that too has such a wide range to it. I think the one that I'm sure that most of us are really hyper aware of is men who were brought up in like, quote, traditional type of settings, where it's, like this is what a man is, and from a very traditional mindset. Very few men were ever taught how to actually be present with emotion, especially if it wasn't anger. Like anger could maybe have a little bit of a place for some men in their, in their upbringing. It's like, especially if they had a dad that was like, yeah, use that anger. Come on, like, let's go kick some ass or whatever it might be. That emotion is one of the few that was actually somewhat welcome for a lot of men. But we all know what we were told about tears, their weakness. It's some kind of show of weakness within us. And that's still really, really pervasive.
Even now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So these are, what's the typical age range of the clients that are coming to you?
I mainly work with people probably like mid 30s.
Okay. So early to mid career.
Yeah.
more or less. And so these, back to the male clients, these guys are showing up with reduced capacity to, you put it really eloquently, just to be present with, like, emotionally, or did I catch that right?
Yeah, just present with their emotions, to actually even be able to identify what their emotions are and be with them.
Yeah. My ears perk up when I hear you say that, just, man to man, but I'm that guy. If I had come to you a few years ago, I would have been the guy, like, I can be present with that one emotion, that anger. And I've learned how to coexist with that. But yeah, I found that I didn't even know the words. And I'm curious if this is what you find with guys. Like, I didn't even know the words. I read an incredible book called Atlas of the Heart by
Yeah.
Brene Brown. It's, her stuff she's a legitimate, like, academic, but this one kind of boiled it down to a more everyday level. And just seeing her, I forget where it is in the book, but just an inventory of all of the different emotions. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing, What are some of the harder emotions in the men that you're working with that you find it difficult for them to be present with, like you say?
I think anything that's connected with grief, except for the anger portion, because anger can show up in that grief aspect. But, things like sadness, I think sadness really is probably one of the biggest ones that men just are really unwilling to connect with or have any type of relationship with, when it's such a natural, thing for us to feel.
Yeah.
I've also noticed that a lot of men even really have a hard time with joy, like especially that more light-hearted, what we might label as kind of goofy, silly type of joy.
Yeah.
Me included. I think men were very much taught to be stoic and, like, very head-based.
Yeah.
And things like joy and sadness are very heart-based. And many men were taught to just close that heart space down, to protect it, to not show it, to not share it. And so, yeah, both sadness and joy can both be emotions that men have a really hard time connecting to.
That makes sense in my own experience. The joy, like, yeah, I know when I feel it, but I think tell me if this makes sense. Until you can name it and in some appropriate way express it, like, you're not experiencing it completely. And so I feel something in me that feels like joy, but unless I, like, say something out loud or do something, it feels incomplete. Is that a kind of how you see men dealing with it?
I think most of us would be able to connect with that, regardless, men, women, other, like, just the experience of feeling and the sensation within our body is one thing, but to actually be able to say out loud, this is what I'm experiencing, that makes it very real, because we're a very communication-based society, right? Like, this is one of the things that separates us from other animals on this planet, is we do have words that we can use. And so putting words to things very much makes them real. The thing that often happens too, it's actually great to hear that you can feel that joy, because especially when we look at people with trauma, which a lot of men do have trauma around emotion. Trauma will basically disconnect us from body sensation very often. And so it's great to hear that you actually have a recognition of the sensation of the joy, just didn't have the words to put to it.
Yeah.
Because many men, it's like, what even is that? Like, if I ask a man, well, what makes you joyful? What brings that sense of joy to you? Like, I don't even know what that is. Like, what does that feel like?
That's a sad statement. It's a sad reality.
And we wonder why we lose 600,000 men a year to their own hand.
600,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the men that we've worked with and engaged with at Epic, in the specific space of fighting trafficking and the demand side of it, that is a common theme. And it's not to excuse the trauma that gets inflicted on someone else because of that, but it does help explain so much of what drives men. And I think the other thing, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, these things all seem to be interwoven, but talk about how shame plays into this with the guys that you're working with.
Yeah. And speaking of Brene Brown, I think that she really addressed shame and guilt really beautifully, because I think that anytime we bring up the word shame, it's really helpful to define what the difference between those two things are, which she put it really perfectly and simply. Guilt is, I did something bad. We can deal with that. I did something bad. Okay, I'm going to do something different next time. Shame is, I am something bad.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the big difference, because especially if we have had secure attachment, like as a child, like we were brought up to be able to realize that we have some level of control over our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings. But if we didn't have that, especially once we start to get into that shame cycle of I am something bad, all of a sudden we start to really have basic human needs that we strive to get fulfilled. And if we're in a state of shame, I'm already something bad, it's really easy for those people to go to, quote, bad things to get needs met.
It's a self-reinforcing process.
Exactly. Like you've probably heard of the term confirmation bias. The mind has a confirmation bias. Once we decide something about ourselves, whether it's good, bad, right, or wrong, whether it's a healthy belief or a very unhealthy belief, unfortunately, the brain will do what it needs to prove ourselves correct, which includes continuing to, if I believe that I'm a terrible piece of shit, I'm going to continue to do things to prove myself correct. I'm fully addicted to that now.
And then on the other end of whatever those decisions are, the shame comes back in and recharges that cycle for one more go around, right?
100%.
Yeah.
That's the hard cycle and that's where I think something like men's groups are so valuable. Yeah. Like there's a men's group here in Olympia that I've been a part of now for a bit. Like this is one of the most powerful pieces of that group is we talked about grief last Wednesday. And it was just an opportunity for each man to finally speak about grief. And so many of the men were like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm actually telling this story. Like I've never actually said this out loud.
Really?
And just to hear from so many of them, like, oh my gosh, it felt so good to not only share my story, but to see like 13 other men share things are like, oh, wow. Like, I don't picture you to be a terrible human.
Yeah.
And you have these emotions too. Like, that's super powerful.
What's the age range in that?
We're really fortunate in our group. We have a wide age range.
Yeah.
Actually, like, I think probably the youngest guy is maybe in his like mid to late 20s.
Okay.
But we have guys that are like in their 60s, I think, probably.
Yeah, that's it. That is pretty broad. Being in my 60s, I hear those stories, and I have had similar experiences. Fortunate enough to be in community with some men where that can happen. A lot of it happens at Epic, which I'm really, really grateful for. But even outside of that, but I also realize it's very still, like you said, it's very rare. Where does that reluctance or reticence, I don't even know what the word is, but like, why, do you have any sense, historically, culturally, whatever, like why it's so hard for men to, going back to what you said, to be present with their emotions? Do you have any sense of where that comes from?
I think just so much of it comes from what we were shown all growing up, as far as like, well, this is what a real man is.
Yeah.
And if we think about, like, especially we think about movies, we think about books that we might have read, we think about just the stories that we've heard, it's usually about someone tough that overcame something. This actually was brought up in a Michael Meade conversation one time that I was like, wow, this is blowing my mind, because we've all heard of the hero's journey, right?
Yeah. Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this hero's journey that does exist throughout mythology, the one challenge about the hero's journey is it doesn't necessarily give life to what a lot of people go through, which is that they don't ever become the hero, that they do mess up. They do just, have emotion. They do break down, and nothing heroic ever actually ends up happening after that. So it always kind of paints this picture that to be a real man, we have to overcome, we have to conquer, and we have to become something. And we have to become this hero of the journey. And so there's like such ingrained stories of like what we have to be. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there isn't power within the story of the hero's journey. There absolutely is. I'm just saying that if that's the end all be all, then we all have to measure up to the hero, and we all have to measure up to big muscles, strong back, like, all of these tropes of what a quote real man looks like and feels like and acts like. Of course, our society does not have an idea of what it looks like to be a man who is fully integrated with the feminine and the masculine aspects of themselves, that has no problem shedding tears. I mean, within that men's group, you still always, it's almost always, as soon as a man starts to cry, tear up within the men's group. I'm sorry, guys. Let me pull myself together. And it's like, if you were laughing right now, you wouldn't apologize. You wouldn't excuse yourself. And laughing isn't any different than tears. It's just the physical expression of the emotion that we're feeling.
And that impulse to apologize for it.
Right.
I had never made that connection between laughter. Yeah, because we don't stop laughing to say, I'm sorry, let me pull myself together. I had never really considered that. What growth have you seen with the men in this space, and what are some of the things that can lead to growth and a more just whole experience of being a man? Is this such a fraught season in our culture, right? I mean, I was just having lunch with a friend today, and we're talking about how the models for masculinity that are being propped up culturally, as they're pretty much one-sided and not all that helpful. But like, where do you see growth, and what are the things that are helping men?
I think that one of the biggest things that's helping men is that there's this explosion of the men's work movement. Back when it was more like the Michael Meads and stuff, that was still kind of this mythopoetic men's movement.
A little more cerebral.
Yeah. And it was also like a thing that was just labeled for like those hippie guys. They go around and they read mythology books, and they do talking stick circles and appropriate Native American ritual. It's right. Like it just like had this whole thing about it. Now today, if you look up men's work, like on Instagram or something, you are going to see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that like different groups and different men that are, specifically marketing men's work processes. And it can be anything from extremely cerebral to extremely esoteric and everything in between. So I think that one of the things that is really great, I mean, of course, anytime things get kind of big and blown up, it can also have challenges to it. But the fact that this is becoming more of a normal thing for people to talk about, like, it's not that weird for a guy to be like, oh yeah, I went to a men's work weekend anymore. Like, that doesn't sound so weird in this society.
Yeah. I can attest to that. I can remember, a long time ago where these conversations among men just didn't happen. Right. Certainly not when I was a teenager. I think about my own dad. He passed away in 2019, and we had a really close relationship. I think he and I had almost the same season. Obviously, he's older than me, but I think we both started to grow as men. I think his situation was prompted by major heart attack and really severe struggles with his, he was a pediatrician. And I saw a change in him, and it kind of inspired and reinforced changes in myself that I knew I needed to do. I remember my dad, he was never really emotionally expressive. He was born in 1926, as you think about that. But what I saw with my dad, the change that I saw in my dad's, the emotion that he would express is he was determined. There came a point later in his life where he was determined to not let an opportunity to say something affirming publicly to someone else. He wasn't going to let that go by. And so the way that played out in our family, this happened a couple of times. We would, and my family's back in the Chicago area, and we'd be home at Christmas. And so there are 5 siblings, and there were times where almost all of us were there with our kids. And, my parents lived in a fairly large house, but it's just a lot of big people. I'm the runt of the litter in my family.
Wow.
We got people from 5'10" to 7 feet, and we're all just laying around my folks' house. But there were 2 times that I can remember where my dad think we were all watching a movie in the living room, just laying sprawled out everywhere. My dad comes in, turns off the TV, and he says, "There's something I want you to know about your mother." And my mom was sitting there, and he just for 5 minutes or more just sung her praises. The old biblical word was he pronounced a blessing
Yeah.
on our mother, and it was a sacred moment. And I think for him was how that was how those emotions came out. Like I want people to know this person like I know her, and so he did that. I think he did the same thing talking about my mom's parents, my grandparents. So it was interesting for my dad and I that it happened. I was in my 40s, and my dad was in his 70s and beyond, and we were kind of going through that change. But I think he inspired me. I'm similar in that regard, in that I'm still not really good at identifying all of the emotions I'm feeling, and certainly expressing them outwardly. But I want to sing people's praises. I want to be like my dad in that regard. And I don't think that's a normal cultural practice from, guys who were born in the 1960s.
Yeah. And you are quite good at that, by the way.
Well, thank you. I give my dad credit. He's like, it was so fun to watch him. I know there had to have been a point of decision where he just said, I'm not going to let these things go unsaid. He wasn't the kind of guy that had said a lot of things in his life and then later regretted them. Mm-hmm. I think if he was fearing anything, if there were any regrets, I think he didn't want to regret not saying something that was positive and life-giving, about someone else. So, I think it's great. What other things are helpful in the men that you're working with that give them tools? Like, what are some of the tools that you use to help them be present with emotions other than anger? Mm-hmm. Or maybe it works with anger too.
Yeah. So I really like to do embodiment and somatic work, which basically is connecting to the actual sensation instead of getting too caught up in like the explanation part of it. Because again, many men haven't been in a place that it was appropriate for them to actually feel into what was coming up for them. It was very much taught to most men to stifle and suppress, mm-hmm. to bottle it up. And so just really leaning into, as something comes up, we're discussing something and a challenge comes up. Instead of just be like, okay, well, tell me the story, because that's all cerebral. It's, okay, as you experience that, like, tell me about what you felt in your body. And that could be very simple, as far as I could feel my shoulders tightening up, and I could feel my eyebrows, clenching together, or, I could feel my jaw clenching, or I could feel my throat closing, or I could feel my body shaking, or whatever that is. That is a huge step in the right direction, to just start to notice what happens physically in the body when an emotion comes forward, whether that's anger, whether that's sadness, whether it's joy. It's like, what actually happens in my body? Because that gets us more connected to that energy.
Is it reasonable to say that every emotion has some physiological manifestation?
My belief is yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because part of my belief, too, is that these things actually come from the body. The neuroscientists that just focus on monitoring brain activity might argue with some of us that are more kind of a somatic embodiment type of practitioners. But the thing is they can't prove that. They've only scanned the body at that level from the neck up. Yeah. They can't do the same type of work within the heart brain, which actually has neuronal activity. Our heart and both our gut and even our nervous system, they have neurons that are firing and shaping us just like the head brain does. We just don't have the ability to actually record that and monitor it yet. And so right now it's that comes from the emotional center of the brain. Well, all that really tells us is we can see a portion of the brain lighting up when people are experiencing emotion. That doesn't mean that it's not also happening somewhere
elsewhere in the body. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. A bunch of different directions I could go.
I know this is such a rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, no, it is.
Go in so many ways.
It is. I find it though, as a man, even just having the conversation, we just don't get to talk about this as much. We talk about experiences. We talk about victories. right? Achievements, or we try to minimize other guys through joking, and that's right. That's sort of a thing. What do you think are some of the kinds of conversations that are difficult for, I'll speak for myself, for older guys to have these days? What are the hard conversations for guys like my generation from your perspective?
I still find it to be mostly around emotion. Yeah. I mean, the thing that I do find as people get a bit older is I think some of the barriers to just speak what's on our mind as we get older, that can start to dissipate. Sometimes for better or worse,
I can
right? Like
attest
we
to
can
that.
think about the old curmudgeon who doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks about him and just says it like it is.
It's the old guys in the balcony of the Muppet movies, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's me.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the filters come down, okay, but then what?
Well, I feel like you, in my experience, have gone the other direction, and it sounds like a lot of it was due to your relationship with your father, and it sounded like he had a similar reaction, which is when his filters came down, and as your filters come down, it's actually exposing something more in the shape of appreciation and in support, actually sharing more of that loving part of us, which it's like the loving, caring, nurturing part. I think that part does actually start to show up more as I see men get older, but there's still this hesitation. And I think this is more of a generational kind of aspect to actually just sit down and have a conversation about sadness, grief, depression, anything like that, that again, just especially within our society has been labeled as some type of weakness within the person.
Yeah. And that's such a sad irony too, because it's at this season of life that I'm at where those kind of tragedies become more and more common, right? I mean, I've lost numerous friends, in recent years to things that, when we were both young, we looked at, well, that's what happens to old guys. And now I am one, and it's happening to my friends. And so, yeah, so all the more reason to know how and to have a community, a safe community where you can process and wrestle through those things.
And I think that,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the other thing that I've been super interested in lately too is the rites of initiation that have been lost within our society. Like we don't have, ritualistic rites of initiation for young boys to become, quote, men. And pretty much all tribal societies, all indigenous, tribal type societies, including those of us from Europe, pre, this sort of Romanization of the whole world. We lived in these tribal societies, and there were rites of initiation, that transition from boyhood to manhood. There's also the thing I've been super interested in more lately is actually the rite of initiation that has definitely been very much lost, is the rite of initiation from adulthood towards that elder position within the tribe. Like that's been really lost.
Yes.
Like we have no sense of love and respect and support for elders at this point. And that, again, men weren't taught what this looks like, what this next phase of life looks like, to be that kind of like that Gandalf figure.
Yeah.
Right? That is so wise, but Gandalf is like fully present with all of his emotion too. He will show sadness. He will show joy. He'll
show anger and rage when necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like he actually owns the fullness of himself.
Yeah. That is such a helpful picture of where I'm at. I know what I have observed. I may have shared this in other episodes with some of our other friends, but it's a season of life where what I'm observing is men and actually women too, but I see it, I'm more sensitive to it with men. We either become elderly, where we start to hold on to things really tightly. We become rigid and our world kind of closes in. Right. And it's driven by fear and wanting to consolidate and conserve what little we have left. And I think that's fueled by the retirement myth that we're fed, from the time we're in our 20s. But so you either become elderly or start to live more open-handedly and become an elder. And it's not a one-time event, but it's like, well, for me, it's been almost like a daily process. Like, how am I going to live today? am I going to fret and, panic or express my frustration and bitterness over, whatever in the past? Or am I going to live open handed and give what I can to the people that are a part of my world? And so I think that tension between being an elder and being elderly. I don't want to be elderly. My wife and I just had a little conversation that pressed against that for me because I was doing some yard work and I had to get up on a big ladder. And she's like, I'm worried about you getting up on a ladder. And so I'm like, I don't want to grow old that way. And just, I don't want my world to shrink. So, but yeah, what's your best advice for young men that when you're working with them, or what do you see them showing up to you, to your, the guys that come to you and say, I want you to help me find my way? Is it any different than what the older guys are dealing with?
I do feel like with younger men, there's more openness right now to the potential of actually expressing their fullness, not just the definition of masculinity that they were taught. Because there's also this embracing of the feminine within us, that actually does have a place within us. And I find that younger men are much more open to that, like to that aspect of being able to show the emotion and be present with the emotion, to be able to be like very caring and loving in a softer way. Men were kind of brought up with what we were taught as kind of the more masculine archetype of loving and nurturing, which is a little bit more like, the punch in the shoulder and the reach around the head and like the noogie on the noggin kind of loving.
Yeah.
And like to go to like a Sacred Sons weekend that I've been to a couple of their events now. And it's a younger men's organization that they're very like free thinking, and to see, huge groups of men like just embrace each other fully, not the like bro hug. Like it's not the bro hug. It's like both arms, tears, like cheek to cheek. It is so inspiring to me. Like it just brings like so much joy to my heart to see that, because a lot of the men that are coming to that group in particular are more like in their mid to late 20s, early 30s. And it's just, Tom, it's so cool to see these young men just like opening up fully to that heart space.
I've witnessed that, seeing that kind of not the bro hug, but the actual, and I feel a sense of longing when I see that, because I wish, and I have that now at this point in my life, but I go back to when I was their age, and I wish I would have had that then. I'm grateful. And again, I think this is the part of my dad's legacy in me. It's like, it doesn't matter how late it happens, it can happen, and men can change. And I think that's one of the, it's one of the things that gives me hope. We're almost out of time, but I want you to just give a little bit of a benediction, a little bit of a Gandalf-y blessing, or impart some wisdom to us. Just like for men, what's one thing that we could do today that would bring life to us and those around us? What would you say?
For me, it's just recognizing that we're already enough. There is so much pressure in this world to be more, to be more, to be more. And until we find ourselves in a place where you're like, you know what, just right now, of course, I can have my dreams of the future, but how I am right now, where I sit with all of my mistakes, with all of the things that I've carried from my past, I'm enough. I'm good enough. And I think if we could find that space and also offer that to each other, instead of the constant criticism, instead of the constant, you're not doing enough, you're not being enough, you're not spiritual enough, you're not wise enough, you're not strong enough, all of these things that we place on each other. If we started to feel that for ourselves, if we started to offer that to each other, I think that a lot of what we see within, again, these 600,000 people that we lose every single year, most of it's from shame and not enoughness.
Andrew Carruthers, you are an elder, and I love you and I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
I love you too, Tom. Thank you so much for this opportunity.